I bought a new house for my daughter. Then she gave it to her stepdad. On Facebook, she wrote, I am happy to give this house to the best man ever. That's when I realized what she had done. When I confronted her, she said, you can't force me to love you. You were never here for me. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Joanna Elton from Florida. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I always believed that love was best shown in the doing, not in the long, dramatic phone calls or the soft-spoken affirmations, but in the relentless grind. Working hours no one else wanted, staying late so others didn't have to, sacrificing every whim so my daughter could have what I never did. My name is Martin, and I've spent the last 30 years working in construction, blueprints, hard hats, and steel-toed boots. Not glamorous, but honest. After my divorce, I didn't get much say in custody. Her mother, Diane, had the house, the school district, the narrative. All I had was the money I made and the will to use it for our daughter. I sent checks, paid for extracurriculars, covered every birthday and Christmas, and quietly held on to the dream that someday she'd understand who I really was, not the ghost her mother painted me to be. When she turned 25, I decided it was time. I had saved for years, not for retirement, not for myself, but for her future. I bought a modest two-bedroom home in a good neighborhood just outside Austin. Not too big, but well-kept, with a backyard and a porch swing I imagined she'd use on warm evenings. The deed was in her name, but I kept the mortgage legally tied to a trust in mine. It was meant as protection, not out of mistrust, but caution. Life was unpredictable. I thought she'd see it for the blessing it was. The day I handed her the keys, she cried, hugged me tighter than she had in years, called me Dad with a softness I hadn't heard since she was a little girl. In that moment, I truly believed the past was behind us. It wasn't even 3 weeks later that I found out what she'd done. I was scrolling through Facebook, something I did sparingly, usually just to keep up with a few old coworkers, when her name popped up. A new post, public, beaming with excitement. There was a picture of the front of the house, newly painted. My house. Beneath it, her caption read, so proud to hand this house to the best man I've ever known. You've been there for me when no one else was. This is your home now, Dad. But she didn't mean me. She meant Greg, her stepfather, the man her mother married after me, the man who never paid a cent for her braces, her college tuition, or the down payment on this home. The man who once told me to stay in my lane when I tried to offer advice on her education. And now, apparently, the man she thought deserved my house. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, the screen glowing in my hand, wondering if I'd misunderstood. Surely this was some inside joke. Maybe a symbolic gesture? But no. As I read the comments, her friends congratulating Greg on his new house, her mother gushing with pride, it hit me like a second divorce. She had truly, deliberately given it away. I was still sitting in that spot when the sun set outside my living room window. No TV, no music. Just me, my thoughts, and a hollow ache spreading through my chest like smoke. It wasn't just about the house. It was the rewriting of history, the final erasure of me from her life story. When I called her the next day, I expected panic. Maybe tears. Maybe an apology wrapped in confusion. But what I got was cold, almost rehearsed. She answered on speakerphone, her voice casual, distracted. When I asked her why she had posted what she did, why she gave the house to Greg, she didn't even pause. You can't force me to love you, she said. You were never there for me. Greg was. My mouth went dry. I tried to explain, remind her, list the things I'd done, the nights I spent working doubles, the years I missed vacations, so she could have new clothes, school trips, birthday parties. But she cut me off. You weren't there, Dad. Not really. Mom told me everything. That was the moment I realized I'd lost more than just a house. I'd lost her. Not because I didn't love her, but because someone else had filled the space I left behind with poisoned memories. Diane had always had a talent for storytelling. She could make you question your own recollection of events. During the divorce, she told the court I was neglectful, that I prioritized work over family. Maybe I did, but only because I thought that was how you proved your love, by putting food on the table, by keeping the lights on, by giving your kid what you never had. I thought one day she'd see that. That one day, she'd look back and realize I didn't leave her. I just stayed behind the scenes, holding the damn thing together. That night, I walked into the garage and sat in the old folding chair by my tool bench. It smelled like sawdust and motor oil, familiar comforts. I stared at a framed photo on the wall, one from her high school graduation. I had stood behind her, smiling, proud. She was 18 then, still willing to let me hug her in public. I remembered how I'd felt that day, thinking maybe, just maybe, we were finally starting over. I stayed in that chair for hours, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I did. I knew the next step wasn't going to be emotional. It was going to be legal, and that terrified me more than anything. Because when a father sues his daughter, there's no coming back from that. I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the slow crawl of headlights on the wall as cars passed by outside. My body was still, but my mind ran like a freight train through every conversation I'd ever had with her, every missed call, every unopened gift, every hug that seemed too short. There's a special kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing you've been trying to win a game that was rigged against you from the start. I thought I could outrun her mother's bitterness with financial generosity, that money could be louder than resentment. But I was wrong. All I had done was fund her comfort while someone else collected the credit. My blood boiled thinking about it. The years I'd spent choking down loneliness so she could live well, and now she was standing on the front porch of my gift, handing the keys to a man who'd never paid a cent toward her upbringing. The next day, I drove over there. I didn't call first. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just knew that I needed to look her in the eye when I asked the question that had been eating me alive. Why? When I pulled up, Greg's truck was parked in the driveway like it had belonged there for years. My stomach turned. The house looked different already. Plants in new pots, wind chimes, a new doormat that said home is where the heart is. I stood there on the sidewalk for a full minute before walking up. I rang the bell twice. When she opened the door, her face shifted from surprise to annoyance. "You could have called," she said flatly. She didn't invite me in. She just stood there, arms crossed. The door cracked open behind her like I was a solicitor she couldn't wait to dismiss. "I saw the post," I said, my voice low. "You gave him the house. The one I bought for you." Her eyes didn't flinch. "I didn't give it to him," she said. "I told him he could live here. What's the big deal?" I felt something in me crack. Maybe it was the months of working overtime to close on that house, or the memory of her as a 5-year-old clinging to my leg when I dropped her off after a weekend visit. "The big deal," I said slowly, "is that I spent nearly every dime I had to give you that home. And now you're parading him around like he earned it." Her lips tightened. "You don't get to do this now," she snapped. "You were never around when it mattered. Greg was. He showed up to my place. He helped me with homework. You sent checks. That's not parenting." I took a step back, stunned. The words hit harder than I expected. She said them like facts, not feelings. Like the case had already been tried and I'd lost. I wanted to shout. I wanted to shake her, tell her about the nights I cried in the break room at work because I couldn't be there, about the times I'd begged Diane to let me take her for more weekends, about the gifts that were returned unopened. But instead, I just said, "Is that really how you see me? As a wallet?" She looked away then, her voice softening just a touch. "I don't know. I never felt like you were there." That was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The silence between us grew heavy. She looked like she wanted to close the door. I looked like I wanted to tear it off its hinges. Eventually, she said, "You can't control what I do with my life. You gave me the house. It's mine." That's when I realized she hadn't even bothered to ask herself whether it was wrong. In her mind, giving Greg the house wasn't betrayal, it was entitlement. She believed she deserved it. That because I hadn't been physically present for every school dance and scraped knee, I forfeited the right to be part of her victories. That stunned me. I'd always believed love was something you showed through sacrifice. But to her, love was presence. Physical, emotional, daily. I couldn't argue with that. But I couldn't excuse what she'd done either. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I just nodded, stepped back onto the porch, and said, "Okay." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, okay?" I looked at her then, not as a daughter, but as a stranger holding something that didn't belong to her. "I mean, you're right. It is your life. But I'm going to make sure it doesn't include anything that belongs to me anymore." She didn't understand at first. I could see the confusion in her face, the flicker of fear. I turned and walked down the steps, heart pounding, my fists clenched at my sides. I didn't look back. If I had, I'm not sure I would have had the strength to keep walking. That night, I opened a file on my computer labeled Legal Protections. It was something my lawyer had helped me set up when I bought the house, just in case. I hadn't planned on using it. Back then, I thought it was a formality, a safety net I'd never need. But as I clicked through the documents, reading the terms, the clauses, the contingency plans, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was no longer about emotion. This was business. Cold, detached, and necessary. If she wanted to treat my love like a transaction, then I'd treat this betrayal like a contract breach. She hadn't just broken my heart. She'd violated the very foundation of trust I'd built with every dime I earned. The hardest part wasn't calling the lawyer or drafting the paperwork. It was mourning the version of her I thought still existed, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest during Saturday morning cartoons, the teenager who once called me after a bad breakup just to hear my voice. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as expendable, replaceable, irrelevant. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing at first, not even my brother, who had always been my sounding board. I needed to do this quietly, deliberately, because once the papers were filed, everything between us would change. And for the first time in my life, I was okay with that. The first thing I noticed when I walked into my lawyer's office was how calm everything felt. The waiting room smelled like lemon oil and old books, and the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile that felt completely out of place considering what I was about to do. I'd been there before. Once when I was setting up the trust that protected the house, and again when finalizing a living will, but never for anything that felt this personal. This wasn't just a matter of assets or technicalities. This was me drawing a line in the sand, finally choosing my own dignity over the myth of reconciliation. When Mark, my attorney, came out to meet me, he shook my hand and said, "You look like a man who's made up his mind." And he was right. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolved. We went over everything, slowly, carefully. Mark pulled up the paperwork we'd created years ago, the quiet protections I had built into the home's transfer. Legally, the deed was in my daughter's name, but the mortgage remained under a conditional trust that gave me the right to revoke the gift if certain terms were violated. We drafted that clause more out of paranoia than necessity at the time, but it turned out to be a godsend. "What exactly do you want to do?" Mark asked me, his eyes searching mine like he needed to know whether I was prepared for the consequences. I told him I wanted to reclaim the house, fully, legally, without any ambiguity. No room for negotiation. No last-minute apologies. I wanted it clear that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal, and I wasn't going to let it slide. The formal process started with a notice of revocation, delivered by certified mail. A week later, my daughter would receive a letter stating that the property was being reclaimed due to a violation of the gift's terms, namely, transferring beneficial use of the home to a third party without the grantor's consent. It was cold language, detached, but that was the point. I didn't want emotion muddying what had now become a legal decision. Greg, despite never being named, would be affected too. He'd have to vacate. And she, my daughter, would have to face the fact that not everything in life came with second chances. There was a part of me, deep down, that hoped she'd call, that she'd ask me why, that she'd fight to understand instead of defend her choices. But the phone stayed silent. She didn't even flinch. 2 days after the notice was delivered, I got a text from Diane. Just 3 words. "What is this?" No punctuation. No greeting. I ignored it. I didn't know her an explanation. Not after all the years she'd spent undermining me, spinning stories about my absence like they were gospel. The real kicker came when her sister, Janice, called me. We hadn't spoken in years, and suddenly she was leaving voicemails like we were old friends. "Martin, you can't be serious. She's your daughter. She made a mistake. Don't throw her out over a Facebook post." I didn't return her call either, because it wasn't just a post. It was the culmination of years of being treated like an outsider in my own family. The house was simply the final straw, but not everyone thought I was wrong. A week after the news started spreading through the family grapevine, my brother Aaron called. He didn't waste time with small talk. "I heard what happened," he said, "and for what it's worth, I'd have done the same." He always had a way of getting to the point, but this time his voice carried more weight than usual. "You tried, man. You tried harder than most would." And she spit in your face. I didn't say anything at first, just sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, grateful someone finally saw it the way I did. "What you're doing isn't spiteful," Aaron continued. "It's self-respect, and it's about damn time you showed some." I didn't realize how badly I needed that validation until I felt my throat tighten with emotion. That weekend, I drove past the house again, not to snoop or spy, just to see it one last time before the process became final. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that made the Texas air shimmer like glass. Greg was out front mowing the lawn like he owned the place. I watched from down the street, parked far enough away to avoid suspicion, and for a moment I felt the sting of what could have been. This was supposed to be my daughter's fresh start, a home where she could build her life, maybe even raise a family someday. And instead, it had become a monument to my erasure, a gift twisted into a symbol of my failure as a father. I drove away without stopping, without rolling down the window. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want theatrics. I just wanted closure. Mark called me Monday morning to confirm the process was moving along. Once the revocation finalized, we'd file a motion for possession, then an eviction notice if they didn't vacate voluntarily. It all sounded so sterile, so procedural. But every line of paperwork felt like stitching in a wound I hadn't realized was still open. I had thought taking legal action would feel like revenge. It didn't. It felt like grief, like burying something I'd spent decades trying to keep alive. And yet, somewhere beneath all that sorrow, I also felt something else, relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be understood by people determined to misinterpret you. 3 weeks later, I received confirmation. The house was legally mine again. Mark handed me the final paperwork, neatly clipped and signed, and said, "That's it. They have 10 days to leave." I nodded, but I didn't smile. There was nothing to celebrate. I didn't even tell anyone, not even Aaron. I just went home, opened a beer, and sat in my backyard under the quiet hum of a setting sun. I stared at the sky and thought about all the birthdays I'd missed, all the father-daughter dances I'd never been invited to. I had convinced myself for years that money would buy back my place in her heart, that if I just gave enough, she'd eventually see the truth. But money doesn't heal resentment, and gifts can't erase someone else's lies. I had given her everything I could, and when she chose to give it away, she also gave away me. The day the eviction notice was posted, the silence on my phone broke like a dam. It started with a barrage of text messages, first from Diane, then from Janice again, and eventually from numbers I didn't even recognize. The tone ranged from disbelief to outright fury. "You're really kicking your own daughter out?" One message read. Another said, "You finally lost your damn mind." The part that stung wasn't the words. It was how quickly they all turned. People who hadn't said a word when I bought the house were suddenly self-appointed moral authorities now that I was taking it back. Not one of them asked what led to this. They just saw a father putting his daughter on the street and decided it was cruelty, never considering it might be the consequence of choices she made. Then came the Facebook post, the one that turned everything public. She uploaded a picture of the eviction notice taped to the front door. No caption, just the image. But the comments spoke volumes. Her friends and cousins chimed in, attacking me with every label they could think of: narcissist, deadbeat, control freak. One said, "He must have hated you from the start." That one nearly made me drop my phone. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the thread like it was an obituary of our relationship. She didn't delete the comments. She liked them, reacted with hearts and laughing emojis. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was humiliation. She wanted the world to see me as a villain, and she didn't care how many lies she had to let slide to do it. The next morning, I got a call from Aaron. "You seen the circus online?" he asked, voice tight. "Yeah," I muttered. "Well, your daughter's making you look like Darth Vader." He paused. "You okay?" That question, simple as it was, brought a lump to my throat. "No," I admitted. "But I will be." Aaron told me to lay low, not to respond, not to take the bait. "This is what they do," he said. "They rewrite the story, cast themselves as the victim, and hope people don't ask for receipts." He wasn't wrong. Still, part of me wanted to post my side, explain the years of financial support, the trust documents, the betrayal. But what would that prove? The people who mattered wouldn't need proof. And the ones who didn't? They weren't worth my peace. By the end of the week, she'd moved out. Greg too. The house sat empty, blinds drawn, the porch stripped of furniture. It looked less like a home and more like a crime scene. I didn't go inside right away. I just stood in the driveway, the same place I'd stood the day I handed her the keys, and I tried to find a trace of that hope I'd once felt. It was gone. All that remained was a dull ache and a heavy understanding. You can give someone everything and still never be enough. I walked around the back and found cigarette butts in the grass, a half-crushed beer can near the fence. The flower beds I had paid to have planted were dead, just like the future I'd imagined for her. A few days later, I got a letter. Not a typed one. Handwritten. Her handwriting. The same loops and slants from the birthday cards she used to make me when she was little. It was folded neatly, no envelope, just my name written across the front like it had been hand-delivered. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Inside, she wrote, "You didn't have to go this far. I get that you're hurt, but this was cruel." That was it. No apology, no reflection, just blame. Even after everything, she couldn't bring herself to acknowledge what she'd done. She didn't say she was sorry for giving Greg the house, for erasing me online, for letting people drag me through the mud. She just saw herself as the injured party. I folded the letter in half, placed it in a drawer, and poured myself a glass of bourbon. The sting going down matched the one in my chest. That night, Diane called. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. Maybe I wanted to hear her voice. Maybe I wanted to fight. I still don't know. "Congratulations," she said coldly. "You got your house back? Was it worth destroying your daughter over?" Her voice was venom, pure and practiced. I laughed, short, bitter. "No, Diane. I didn't destroy her. You did that years ago when you decided to raise her on lies." The line went quiet. Then she whispered, "You're unbelievable." I took a breath. "And you're consistent." Then I hung up. I blocked her number right after. I should have done it years ago. The worst part wasn't losing the house or facing the backlash. It was realizing just how many people in our lives only ever saw me through Diane's lens. For years, I thought keeping quiet was noble. That if I didn't fight back, she'd eventually stop painting me as the bad guy. But silence doesn't protect the truth, it buries it. I let her rewrite history for too long, and now our daughter believed every word. Maybe I should have spoken up sooner. Maybe I should have fought for weekends, for holidays, for my place in her life. But back then, I thought providing was enough. I thought being the financial backbone meant something. Turns out, people remember who tucks them in more than who keeps the lights on. Now, with the house back in my name and everyone's opinion of me dragging behind like chains, I found myself back where I started, alone, but with my dignity. I changed the locks, hired a cleaning crew, repainted the walls, and replaced the blinds. It felt sterile, almost transactional, but it was necessary. If I was going to rebuild anything, my life, my boundaries, my peace, it had to start with clearing out what they left behind. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. What I felt now was older, deeper, a kind of mourning that couldn't be fixed by conversations or apologies. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I was preparing for peace. And that meant accepting that some relationships don't heal. They end. 10 days after the final court confirmation, the locks on the house were changed. I didn't do it myself. I hired a professional. I didn't want my fingerprints on the doorknobs. Didn't want to be inside a space that still smelled like them. The locksmith was a young guy, probably my daughter's age, and as he worked, he made small talk, asking if I'd just moved in. I lied and said yes. Said I was starting over. It wasn't untrue. not entirely. Once the keys were in my hand, I walked through each room slowly, deliberately, like I was erasing the shadows one step at a time. The air was stale, thick with a silence that felt loaded. Their things were gone, but the evidence of them lingered in small ways. The way the couch had dented the carpet, the faint scent of cologne in the hallway, a pink bobby pin left on the bathroom sink. It struck me, unexpectedly, how much of someone can remain after they've left, even when you want them gone. I spent the rest of that day boxing up what little was left, mostly junk. A chipped mug, an old hoodie, a handful of loose papers. I rented a storage unit and paid for 3 months in advance. I texted her the address, told her she had until the end of the lease to claim her things, and then I blocked her number. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even emotional. It was mechanical, like switching off a light in a room I no longer used. My phone had been a battlefield for weeks. Calls, texts, voicemails full of accusations and begging, sometimes both in the same message. But once I hit block, there was nothing, just quiet. And that quiet, for the first time in months, felt like peace. That night, I slept a full 8 hours. No tossing, no waking up in a sweat, no pacing the house at 3 a.m. wondering what I could have done differently. It was the kind of sleep I hadn't had in years, and when I woke up, I felt like I'd finally surfaced from underwater. There was no more explaining to do, no more defending myself to people who had already made up their minds. I had spent most of my adult life trying to earn the love of people who measured affection by proximity, not effort. And when I stopped chasing that, I found something I didn't even know I was missing: clarity. I wasn't a villain. I wasn't a hero either. I was just a man who did what he thought was right, and when that wasn't enough, he walked away. A week later, I ran into Janice at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her, hair shorter, glasses thicker. But her voice snapped me back in an instant. "Martin," she said, eyes wide with that same performative concern she'd always wielded like a weapon. "Can we talk?" I wanted to walk away. I wanted to pretend I hadn't heard her. But something in me, some stubborn remnant of who I used to be, nodded. We stood near the produce section, surrounded by oranges and the whir of refrigeration, and she launched into it. "You really hurt her," she said. "She's been crying nonstop. She doesn't understand why you're being so cruel." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get defensive. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "That girl gave away the last thing I had to give. And then she blamed me when I took it back. I'm not cruel. I'm done." Janice didn't say anything for a long while. Then she nodded slowly, almost like she'd finally seen a version of me that Diane hadn't narrated for her. The fallout wasn't just emotional. It was visible. At family functions, my name stopped coming up. I wasn't invited to Diane's niece's wedding, which didn't bother me, but still made the message clear. I'd been cut from the narrative. Even mutual friends started pulling back, unsure of who to believe. Some reached out quietly, offering support in hushed tones, afraid to be seen choosing sides. Others disappeared completely. It was lonely, but it was honest. I'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by people who only saw a version of me someone else created. I didn't go online anymore. I stopped checking Facebook, deleted the app. I didn't want updates. Didn't want to see if she posted more about healing or removing toxic people. I knew how this would go. She'd recast the story, make herself the protagonist, and eventually, the world would forget my side entirely. But I hadn't forgotten mine. Every quiet morning, every night I spent cooking for one, every drive through the city where I used to imagine her future playing out, I remembered. And in remembering, I reminded myself why I did what I did. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting myself. I had allowed too many people to take pieces of me in the name of love, never noticing how hollow I was becoming. This wasn't revenge. It was survival. And as painful as it was to cut her off, I knew with absolute certainty that it was the only way to stop the bleeding. Because love without respect isn't love. It's servitude. And I had bowed long enough. Toward the end of that month, I received a letter from Greg. Typed, formal, almost robotic. He asked if there was any chance of reconciliation or reconsideration. He said he didn't mean to come between me and my daughter. That he didn't know the house was mine. I didn't bother responding. He knew. They both did. And even if he didn't know the legal details, he knew enough to let her hand over something he hadn't earned. That letter went into the same drawer as hers, tucked away with the rest of the things I no longer had space for in my life. Some things don't deserve closure. They deserve distance. I never imagined peace would feel so much like grief. Not loud or explosive, but quiet, slow, like water draining from a sink you forgot was running. In the weeks that followed the final cutoff, my days took on a strange, gentle rhythm. I woke early, not out of necessity but out of habit, and found myself watching the sun rise through the window of what had once been hers. The room was empty now, no furniture, no photos, no trace of her laughter. But still, it was where I found myself most mornings, sipping coffee and letting silence say everything words had failed to. There were no calls, no texts, no more fights. The storm had passed, and in its absence, I was left to comb through the wreckage and decide what, if anything, was worth salvaging. People talk about grief like it's a reaction to loss, but for me, it was more like a companion. It sat beside me during breakfast, walked with me during my evening strolls, whispered in my ear during commercials that featured fathers and daughters smiling over dinner. I missed her. I missed her in the most irrational, unfair ways. Even after everything. After the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, I still caught myself wondering if she was eating well, if she was safe, if she cried at night like I sometimes did. That's the curse of parenthood, I guess. Even when your child breaks you, your love doesn't switch off. It just turns into something quieter, more painful, something you carry instead of share. I wrote her a letter, not to send, not even to keep, but just to get the words out of my body. I sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, and let it all spill out. How I remembered the first time I held her, how I used to hum old Motown songs while feeding her bottles, how I bought her that damn house because I wanted to give her something no one could take away. I told her I loved her, even now, but that I couldn't keep pretending the past hadn't happened. I told her I hoped she found what she was looking for, that she healed, that one day she looked back and saw the truth behind all the lies. I didn't beg for forgiveness. I didn't offer mine. I just told the truth. Then I folded the letter, lit a match, and watched it curl into ash over the kitchen sink. It wasn't for her. It was for me. Sometime in mid-spring, I took a road trip. Nothing grand. Just a few days driving through small Texas towns, windows down, music up. I stopped at antique stores, had coffee in roadside diners, and talked to strangers who knew nothing about me or the history I carried. It felt good, like breathing fresh air after being trapped underwater. I wasn't trying to escape. I was learning to exist beyond the orbit of people who had taken more than they gave. I stayed in a cabin one night, deep in the hill country, and for the first time in months, I didn't think about her. Not out of bitterness or numbness, but because I had finally run out of grief to spend on someone who wasn't willing to meet me halfway. Back home, I kept things simple. I turned the house into a rental. Nothing fancy, just something clean and well-kept. I interviewed tenants personally, made sure they weren't just looking for a place to crash, but a place to care for. There was something healing about that. About taking a space that had been twisted by betrayal and repurposing it into something functional, something unburdened by memory. One young couple moved in, newlyweds. They planted flowers out front, laughed on the porch at night. Their joy didn't make me bitter. It made me hopeful. That house had been born from love, even if it was misplaced. And maybe now, in someone else's hands, it could still become a home. I never unblocked her. Never responded to the mutual friends who said she was trying to change. One of them sent me a screenshot of something she posted, a vague quote about boundaries and forgiveness, about how people show you who they are when you say no. I didn't engage. I didn't want to know whether it was about me. That part of my life was over. My peace was not up for negotiation, not anymore. People like Diane and Greg had taught her how to rewrite history, how to weaponize emotion. And maybe, one day, she'd unlearn all that. But it wouldn't be on my watch. I'd done my part. I'd loved her the best I could. And when it wasn't enough, I let her go. There was no grand moment of closure. No phone call. No apology. Just the quiet unfolding of a new life. One where I wasn't constantly trying to prove I mattered. That's the thing about boundaries. People think they're walls, but really, they're doors. And I had finally closed mine, locked it, and walked away. Not out of spite, not even out of pain, but because I finally understood that some doors aren't meant to be reopened. Some stories don't end in reconciliation. They end in quiet understanding, in reclaimed dignity, in solitude that feels like freedom. And I'm okay with that. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because they never saw your worth until you stopped showing up? Sometimes choosing peace over pain is the only way forward. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in the power of standing firm in your boundaries, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real stories about family, betrayal, and the hard truths that shape us. See you soon in the next story.